Hello everyone, I'm Eltob, and ahead of Fusion's release later today, I thought I'd talk a bit about the thinking that went into Fusion, and why I believe it's a step forward for all UI developers. So let's start with the thought experiment. I'd like you to just imagine a UI. Perhaps you can see some buttons, or maybe a menu's open of some kind, just any UI will do. Now when you thought of a UI, you probably saw that UI a bit like a snapshot, like a single point in time or a picture. That's because when we think of UI, we think in terms of end results. We see what the UI looks like at that instant. However, we don't currently program like that. When we write code, we code in terms of applying changes. We just think about what properties and instances we need to change in order to hopefully arrive at the end result that we want. Now, of course, this is bad, right? We have to start from the right initial conditions. We have to get every single change right. We can't forget anything. It's extremely easy to end up at the wrong end result. Or in other words, it's a massive surface area for bugs. So with this in mind, can we code the way that we think in terms of these end results? Well, it turns out the answer is yes. And the answer is declarative programming. With declarative programming, you tell the computer what result you want, not what steps it should perform to get there. So to solidify this concept a bit, let's take a look at an example of declarative programming. Say, for example, we have this UI element, which shows the player how much money they have. With declarative programming, we would just tell the computer, this text should show the player's money. We don't care when the computer has to change the text. We don't care how it does it. All that we care about is that in the end, the text will always show the player's money. It's just as simple as that. So let's contrast this with what we might do today. So we would have to lay out every single step for the computer, and so we might say something a bit like this. Set this text to be the player's current money. When we receive a money changed event, set this text to be the player's current money. It's a bit unreasonably long and hard to understand. The relationship between the text and the money isn't really that clear, and it's not even guaranteed because other code could mess with the text and completely mess up this fine balance. So in my eyes, the declarative code is a lot more superior because declarative code just works the way that you think more, right? So where does Fusion come into this? Well, Fusion is a library for building UI declaratively, or more specifically, it lets you declare how your UI should look given some input data. Fusion achieves this by building on the principles of reactive programming. Now, I am aware that some of you might not know what reactive programming is, so let me try and explain it for you. You'll see why it's important in a second. So here we have a variable, numCoins, which we have set to 50. So this is pretty standard stuff. How would we now define a variable which is double numCoins? Well, you might try this. And, well, this would work. Or at least, this would work once. You see, if numCoins was to change in the future, double coins wouldn't change along with it, which leads to a rather strange inconsistency. Now, in this example, it's pretty easy to spot and fix, but in larger code bases, this sort of thing can end up happening all of the time in very subtle ways. So instead of setting double coins to be numCoins times 2, wouldn't it be nice if we could say double coins is numCoins times 2? Or in some sense, double coins will always be double the number of coins. Well, this is what reactive programming is all about. Instead of worrying about how and when our variables should change, we can just declare how our variables should relate to each other. In other words, it's declarative programming for your variables. So since we're going to be talking about these kinds of relationships a lot, let's use a diagram that helps us see them. So we'll start by putting our variables in boxes. So we have numCoins and we have double coins. We'll write their values inside, so numCoins is 50 and double coins is numCoins times 2. and we'll use arrows to show when one variable uses another. This diagram that we've drawn is a very simple example of something called a reactive graph. These are useful because the arrows show you how your data flows through your variables. Now, of course, this is a very simple example to illustrate the basic idea. So let's take a look at a bit more of a realistic graph. So here you can start to see why a reactive graph is a bit more of a useful tool. Our data starts from the inputs on the left, and it flows through our variables to the message on the right. This idea is what Fusion is fundamentally built upon. In fact, the only thing left to add is the UI part, which we could just model as another variable. So it should start to be a bit clearer why Fusion uses this kind of reactive programming. It gives us a fully declarative way of connecting our input data to our UI instances. Or put another way, we can focus on what the data should be rather than when the data should change. And so that's all there is to it. If you understand those concepts, you understand how Fusion works. You're just declaring relationships between variables. And Fusion will just compute all of those for you. So, how does Fusion take all of those concepts and make them work in code? Well, to learn how, let's try and build up that reactive graph from before using Fusion. To start with, let's focus on the inputs: num coins and item price. These you can think of acting like a container for a value. They're just a fixed value, and this value may be changed by some code. So to represent this sort of container, Fusion uses something called state objects. These objects, they just store a single value which can be set and got at any time. Now let's move on to our computations: final coins, can afford, and message. To represent these, Fusion uses computed objects, and they use a callback to run a computation on your other objects. I'd like to invite you to sort of cross-reference between the code and the diagram here. It should be relatively intuitive what's happening. The functions, they're just returning the values of the variables, and we're just calculating the values of the variables using the values of other variables, rather intuitively. So finally, let's connect all of this data to a text label. So firstly, we need to create the text label, and for that, we can use Fusion's new function. This is just a wrapper around instance.new that provides some nice features, for example, assigning properties right away. Fundamentally, we're still getting an instance back from this. So yeah, it provides another nice feature too, and that is that we can pass in one of our variables just as a property. And Fusion will make sure the property stays up to date as the variable changes. We don't have to think about it. So with only this code, we've now implemented that entire reactive graph in Fusion. We haven't had to think about how to update our variables or our UI. Instead, we only need to worry about the data, not the updates. So, Fusion is a relatively simple idea. Why do I think it's a step forward for UI developers? After all, Fusion is definitely not the first declarative UI library to be on Roblox. Instead, what I think sets Fusion apart is its simplicity. Fusion is conceptually very simple and very lightweight to implement. In addition, Fusion is much faster, not just because it's simpler, but because it knows how your variables relate to each other better, and so it can optimize how they update. Fusion can therefore get much closer to optimal performance than any of its peers. Finally, Fusion will make declarative UI a lot more feature-rich. While the core of Fusion is already in place, in-box support is on the way for much more declarative stuff, including a focus on animation features which are commonly overlooked in many other UI frameworks. In my opinion, you shouldn't need to reach for third-party solutions to problems that almost every UI developer inevitably will have to solve. So, whether you're on board with Fusion or not, I do think there is one thing certain about all of this. The future is declarative. Fusion may only be one library for one platform, it may not work for you, or you may love it. But I believe that whatever the case, it's part of a paradigm shift for the wider world of development. Once you get to know declarative programming, you'll just never want to use anything else. It just works the way that you do. So, if this taste of Fusion got you interested, you can check it out at the github.io link on screen. I'm still in the process of writing all the tutorials and documentation, but there should be enough there to get you started. You can reach me on Twitter at @ltop_ if you have any questions, or if you just wanted to keep up with Fusion and maybe some of my other projects too. Thank you so much for your time, and have fun with Fusion. I really look forward to seeing what you guys make. Yeah, have fun.